Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now going to be running through the order of events that took place with Kyrie Irving that led to him being this villainous character in the eyes of a lot of Celtics fans. I know it's been a handful of years, and I would say that the more mature Celtics fans are a little bit more forgiving of everything that went down. It seems like it was a little bit, ultimately, the departure of Kyrie in free agency was better for both parties, where Kyrie was able to sort of go on his own journey that led him to the point where he is this legitimate leader, not sort of the wanting to be veteran leadership with the Celtics organization that ended up being a mess, and the younger players for the Celtics that Kyrie didn't necessarily seem to be meshing with great were able to fully develop. So going all the way back to August of 2017, the Boston Celtics decided to trade for Kyrie from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kyrie had asked out of Cleveland after seeming to be frustrated with being that second fiddle behind LeBron James, and the Celtics, coming off of an Eastern Conference Finals loss to the Cavaliers, in which they were without their starting point guard in Isaiah Thomas, who is beloved by Celtics fans. For me personally, as somebody who didn't get to really experience the 2008 title, Isaiah Thomas is my favorite Celtic of all time. And, you know, it was because the way that he was able to sort of jumpstart the organization and their rebuild and such, and, you know, put them back in postseason contention was something that was really fun to see Isaiah Thomas sort of start it from the ground up and help lead them to a conference finals appearance. But all that being said, Thomas was missing that Eastern Conference Finals with a hip injury. It's clear that he was never the same after that. And it was kind of a no-brainer for the Celtics moving Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, Ante Zizic, and a first-round pick. Now, the first-round pick was Colin Sexton. It was the 8th overall pick, so there was some value there. But for the Celtics, they felt like they were in a position where they could steal the number 2 player from their biggest rival in the Eastern Conference and potentially sort of push their chips in to become real competitors, not to mention the fact that they already had the number 1 overall pick in the 2017 draft, which ended up being Jason Tatum. So they didn't need all of these extra young pieces. They were trying to begin their ascension to be NBA Finals contenders. And, you know, I think the fact that the Celtics were a little bit ahead of schedule made it seem that Kyrie's leadership could be what takes them over the top, and the Celtics doubled down on the idea that they were potential finals contenders when they also signed Gordon Hayward in the offseason. So that first season, 2017-18, this was Tatum's rookie year. Gordon Hayward, of course, goes down with the season-ending injury in the first few minutes of that game, so that was incredibly tragic to see. But even still, Kyrie was the number 1 option, averaged over 24 points per game, led the Celtics to a 55-27 record. But Kyrie did end up missing the final month of the regular season with a knee injury and underwent surgery that kept him out for the remainder of the postseason. Even then, though, the Celtics were able to make it to the conference finals once again, push the Cavaliers to Game 7, backed behind a younger Jason Tatum, and still it felt like the future was extremely bright for the Celtics. LeBron took over down the stretch of that game, but, you know, they went toe-to-toe with LeBron James. That was obviously one of the weaker teams in LeBron's history with the Cavaliers. But still, for the Celtics, who were relying a lot on this youth talent, a massive success for them, and they felt like going into the next season with a healthy Kyrie Irving, that would be enough to, again, put them over the top. Which brings on October 2018. Kyrie, before the season, sort of went to a season ticket holder event for the Boston Celtics, and he gave the speech that sort of goes down in Celtics infamy that he said, if you guys will have me back, I plan on re-signing here next year. And the crowd went wild, and the expectation was that this version of the Celtics with Kyrie Irving were going to go on to win championships, and the regular season immediately did not live up to the fantasy standards that were sort of being thrown out there during the offseason, because LeBron James was finally out of the Eastern Conference. He had just signed with the Lakers. The Celtics looked like they were ready to take this next step and that their top competitor was gone, but they were just sort of a middling team throughout the year. They finished 49 and 33 as the 4 seed throughout the season. Kyrie was speaking up at times with the media. It was clear that he was being very contentious with the Boston media, didn't appreciate a lot of the questions that were thrown out there, and he also had concerns with his young teammates and whether or not they were actually buying into the product of trying to contend. He felt like, and I do think that this is legitimate, that Kyrie was possibly a little bit arrogant at this time, thinking that Kyrie, it did feel like, and I have no doubt that he's an intelligent person, but he had a little bit of the smartest person in the room syndrome during his early years, especially coming off of his championship, and he thought that he 100% knew what was right. So he throws his teammates under the bus a number of times, and, there is definitely a case to be made that some of the Celtics young players weren't fully buying in to the extent that they needed to. The chemistry was all off that season as a whole. They kind of suffered from having too many guys. Jaylen Brown has talked about it since, how he felt like he wasn't satisfied with his role that season. He was sort of buried coming off of the bench. Marcus Morris was a good player at the time. And, Marcus Morris, when he gets hot, he gets really hot. We saw that in, Game 5, I believe, of the Cavs-Celtics series. But, he was sort of taking away from Jaylen Brown's minutes, and he didn't like that. Gordon Hayward had returned from injury, definitely didn't look like himself, maybe didn't deserve to get the amount of playing time that he did, but Brad Stevens was trying to work him back into the mix of things, and like I mentioned, Jaylen Brown was just buried a little bit, and there was clearly a growing rift between Kyrie and the rest of the locker room. Kyrie, before the All-Star break, sort of walked back his commitment a little bit in terms of whether or not he was going to re-sign with the Celtics. Said that he doesn't owe anybody anything, and then at the All-Star break, there are the videos that come out of him and Kevin Durant talking with one another, people speculating that that was them sort of planning on potentially linking up. Kyrie was really mad at the Boston media who was asking him about it, and he was getting worked up at the fact that the media was getting worked up over, one video, but it was obviously ended up being the case that Kyrie ends up deciding to, link up with Kevin Durant. They sign with the Nets in the offseason after the Celtics lose to the Bucks in the Eastern Conference semifinals. And in that series, it was pretty disastrous for Kyrie, where he averaged 20 points per game on 22% shooting splits, 3.6 turnovers per game. He went 4 of 18 in game 2. Talked about how he needs to be shooting more. And at that point, I don't think there were a lot of Celtics fans that really wanted him back. So he ends up moving on for Brooklyn, and he kind of bashes the Celtics some on the way out in the media himself. And once he gets to Brooklyn, he avoids a number of games against the Celtics. It was clear there was some animosity between him and the Celtics fans, and that was clear that once he did start playing, he stomped on the logo for the Celtics after Game 4 when the Celtics swept him and the Nets in the playoffs in 2022. That could have also been when the Nets beat the Celtics in the playoffs the next year. But, one way or another, Kyrie stepping on the Celtics logo. He flipped off some fans as well, which he recently talked about how he feels bad about, and there was the fan that threw the water bottle at him. So again, extremely contentious afterwards as well. Now, again, I think that both the Celtics and Kyrie are in better places now that that divorce did take place. And Kyrie is going to get booed by a number of Celtics fans. I have a hard time imagining that Celtics fans are going to resist it. I do feel like the overall prevailing idea is he shouldn't be at least quite as hated within Celtics circles, but again, there are, and especially when we're talking about the Boston fan base, which can be a little bit unforgiving and obnoxious, there are going to be people who are going to be upset as a member of Celtics fandom. Again, as things currently stand, I don't really hold any ill will towards him. I think it'll be really sweet beating him, but that sports hatred doesn't necessarily exist, at least in my eyes, anymore. But we'll also have to see how he sort of conducts himself throughout the course of this series. He's been extremely composed the past couple months. We'll see what happens. I could also, he could make some sort of a comment that could set me off once again. So we will see how that all plays out. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section about this whole situation. Finally, we have this homecoming taking place on the biggest stage. So it's going to be a huge storyline. But we're going to be taking our next break, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into the reports that came out this morning about Kristaps Porzingis being cleared to play in Game 1 of the NBA Finals and how that could impact this series. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.